So, if you've been watching my other videos, you've probably noticed that I have a penchant for backseat game design, and it's something that I've always enjoyed, so let's have another opportunity to talk about some game design fundamentals, and one which I think should be of interest to most players, and certainly because you'll go to forums and see people discussing game design and not really seeming to notice or care that there are different types of players, and the reasons that we play a game can be radically different even though we enjoy the same things or happen to like the same game. This is something that's always been very apparent to me. I grew up in a household with other gamers. My dad, my brother, and my sister will play games, but we all played games for radically different reasons, and we would often like the same game, but again for different reasons, or have different games that we enjoyed. So for me, this was always something that is super obvious, and that's what I would like to talk about today. But let's kick things off with a little bit of history, just to give you the backstory about this particular theory that I'm going to talk about today, which is Bartle's taxonomy of player types. So of course it's always best to start off with a little bit of history. Back in the days of the early internet, there was a particular type of genres, a precursor to modern MMOs, called MUDs, multi-user dungeons. Now, in order to play a MUD, you needed an internet connection, and this is before my time, so I can't really say much about the genre itself, but I do know that it was very expensive to run an internet connection at this time, since you would be paying for data at an obscene rate, so you had to be a very dedicated player in order to play this, and MUDs were fairly popular. And so one of the developers on these MUDs, Richard Bartle, took the time to interview various players to ask them, why do you play my game? What is it that makes this game so great, that makes it worth the investment of all this time and money? And if he was expecting to get just one solid answer to help further game design, then I don't know. But he has found that not only did these people disagree, they disagreed violently, because early internet was still the internet, and so other people who disagree with you are idiots who don't know what they're talking about and have no understanding of what actually made this game so excellent. But sorting through all of these different answers, he found that you could basically sort these people into 4 general types of players, and he wrote a paper about it in 1996, sometime after this. And this is Bartle's taxonomy of player types, and it is a way of classifying gamers into different types based on what they like to do in games, and this was really designed to describe MMOs more than anything else, but it can be to some extent applied to other games. Now, there are different variations on this particular theory with different points, but we're going to stick to the basic one, which sorts players into one of 4 types. There is a more advanced and somewhat more complicated system which sorts players into 8 types of players, but the 4 basic types will do just fine for this example. So there are 4 player types, and initially they were sorted by card suits, but that was later changed, and we now know them as achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. And if you're interested, I will put a link in the description for a simple test that you can take in order to get your rating for these various groupings. Now, let's talk about what these actual groups represent themselves. The first ones are probably the most obvious ones to both design for and the ones that you know. Generally considered to be like sort of the classic gamers. That's achievers. They like to basically have some measure of their success within a game, be it for a variety of reasons, you know, to demonstrate their skill, for prestige, or anything like that. People like completionists are generally achievers, but you could also have guys like speedrunners, anyone who has an accomplishment within the game to demonstrate skill they're generally an achiever type player. So they like to have things like ladders, scoreboards, levels, anything that shows solidly their skill and rewards them with a prestige. Since I played quite a bit of Path of Exile, I can tell you right now that the Challenge League microtransactions are often something that these guys like, because that is a prestige item. It is limited to only those who have demonstrated a certain dedication and skill to acquire, and so they care about that sort of thing. So I was on the forums the other day looking at the fact that they extended the Legacy Leagues for Path of Exile, and a lot of the players who are complaining about this decision are upset because they feel that it gives other people a chance to earn those rewards, which lowers the prestige of them being rare and them having it, so that they have that, look at me guys, I've got a legacy portal, you know what that means, that sort of thing. Yeah, in a single player game, achievers like achievements. They like 100% completion, they like to beat the game. If there are extra endings, completion bonuses, that's their sort of target. If they're in a multiplayer game, then they like to show off their game skills. They like to be the elites, the high-ranking players on ladders, for example. They're not necessarily there to show that they are better than other players, they are there to demonstrate that they are really good at the game. Basic design elements that attract them: achievements, challenge and difficulty, something that not every player can accomplish and therefore shows their skill. That's the sort of thing that they want. And designers can often incorporate things like, I said, challenge rewards, cosmetic microtransactions, and things like that that are rewarded for challenges, give a clear and obvious sign and signal to other players that these are elite gamers. So that's what they like, and that's what they're into a game to play for, in the basic sense. Obviously it's somewhat more complicated, and we'll give demonstrations of that once we've gone through the other player types to explain how just because you are in one group doesn't mean that you don't have attractions to the other groups, or that you might be within a group but simultaneously disagree with other achievers or other explorers or whatever on what makes a game great. But we'll go into that a little bit more when we get to the other groups. So next up we'll have the explorers. These are the guys who like to explore. Pretty much self-explanatory in their title. They like to find secrets, they like to have game knowledge, and that sort of thing. But they are also the sorts of players who like to engage in story, discover lore, as well as things like theory crafting, also appeals to explorers. That's it more. It's not only an exploration of the physical game space and game world, but also an exploration of the mechanics and the interactions between them, which can appeal to a explorer. Finding a glitch or an Easter egg or something like that, that tends to be very, very good for them. And I'm an explorer type myself, so I can relate to you things that I like and dislike in games, which, for example, time limits and speedruns. I hate them because they often, in games sections which are timed and have that restriction, mean that I can't go off on that tangent inside area and poke around, and that just bothers me so much. But finding glitches or exploits, I love that. Seeing the way that my skills and whatnot connect together to make me, that just is appealing to me. And I'm not interested in a game for its challenges and end goals so much. I don't shy away from a challenge, but I will only ever get as good as a game requires me to be to experience its content. I'm not going to play a game to be the best at it. I will be as good as I need to be to get through it in order to see what the next level looks like. I like to see again, I'm going to use Path of Exile here. I like the sense of discovery I get when a unique item drops, and I like to see how those can interact with one another. There's a real joy when you get two and you can see that there's a clear synergy between them, and you're like, oh yes, that's great. So that's something that really appeals to me. Single player games, exploration and puzzles really do appeal. I like puzzle games, I like exploration based games. I enjoy story based games. Walking simulators are absolutely fine to me. Like I said, challenge is secondary to what I am looking for in a game. I like lore, I like complicated mechanics that interact with one another to come up with different viable strategies. Things like that. I do hate it when there are restrictions on various playstyles that force me into doing things a certain way that I don't want to have to particularly do. You'll have seen, if you've watched my Stellaris video on crisis events, you'll notice that I complained that the crisis events, they've made them super hard, but that's not my problem with it. My problem with it is that it restricts the number of viable strategies in the game, reducing the game down so that it is always the exact same game that you end up playing. That sort of thing, I hate that. I want it to be various different strategies so that I can try and mix it up with different mechanics and try different interactions and different play styles in order to see where they go. And that sort of thing. So, stuff like that. When it comes to multiplayer based games, I am less social, so I generally play by myself, go off and do my own thing. But I do know other players who are into exploration, because obviously I do play with other people who share similar tastes because we play similar games. And in multiplayer spaces, quite often you'll find that they like to show other people the things that they have discovered, and help you out with different game mechanics and say, hey, check out the secret area or Easter egg that I found, isn't that cool? That sort of thing, that does appeal to me. I've played games like Borderlands where I would go and join low-level groups in order to show them where areas were. Not so much to be like, check out my guns and how great my character is and how well it's built, but to be more like, have you seen this? There's a secret tunnel here, or whatever like that. That's something that appeals to me in a multiplayer game. Not always though, because I'm not really that into the multiplayer aspect. I do prefer to play solo or with people that I know rather than anything else. But yeah, it's interesting. You can spend a lot of time with games provided they've got those in-depth mechanics, but once a game feels like a lot of it is becoming samey, you tend to drop out because you've seen what's there, you've experienced it, and now it's time to move on. And that's sort of the way that explorers are. So it's not just an exploration of physical geographic space, but also mechanics and things like that. So that was long and rambly. Let's go on to the next group, which is the socializers. These guys who play simply for socialization. They're not actually interested in the game, its mechanics, or its gameplay. They are there to interact and play with other players. My brother is a socializer. He will not play a game by himself, but he will happily play a game for multiplayer. Cooperative generally, sometimes like competitive, but mostly co-op. And that's the sort of games that he's interested in. He also will play games like Mass Effect with strong characterization, and the interactions between those characters and whatnot. That's also appealing. That's sort of a social simulation, which has obvious appeal to the social types. But you'll also find these guys on forums, message boards, and just generally being helpful, sharing knowledge, helping build up the community, just being friendly, offering advice. They also like to play in guilds in multiplayer games, to network, fill up their friend list, you know, play with other players and just generally enjoy their company rather than playing the game for the sake of the game. And they're generally really great people to play with, because they don't care so much about you being bad and dragging them down. They just like to play with you, which makes it totally cool, because if you suck and you want to play with an achiever, they're probably going to be upset that you're bringing them down. But a socializer, they just want to be with other people, and you'll see them quite often in forums nowadays on like modern games. Quite often they're more interested in that social aspect outside of the game, that they might not even really play the game too much. They play it more as a starting point to have something in common with you to talk about when they're not playing it themselves with their friends. And that's kind of cool. Really, this group of people is fairly easy to sum up. They like to play with others, and they like the interactions with the other player types. There's not really much to say about them other than that. And then we go on to our last group, which is the killers. These are the competitive guys. They want to fight or challenge other players and exert some sort of dominance over them. In many ways they're similar to achievers in that for them it's about a demonstration of skill, but not necessarily skill at the game, but skill in showing that they are the best at something. So whereas an achiever might be going, I'm going to go with 100% completion, and it doesn't matter how many other people sometimes get that 100% completion, they're just there to say, yep, I'm pretty good. The killer wants to be better than you. That sort of thing. They're often playing the anti-hero or things in open world games that has some sort of appeal to them. They like destructible environments and stuff like that. Some of them, again, these are broad categories that can fill many different types within that category. So don't just go pigeonholing them, because so in a sandbox game where you could go nuts, say Grand Theft Auto, where you just run around shooting everyone, that's a killer type player. That's something that would appeal to them in a solo player game. In multiplayer, they like to do PvP. They like to mess with other players. You might see them doing all those annoying things like spawn camping and griefing, going into a low level area with their high level character and killing other players. That's something that they might like to do. But they're not necessarily restricted to being the jerk player. A lot of killer players are, say, the honorable duelist type. They will show up in a game and they will duel you honorably because they just want to compete. They want to demonstrate that they are the best, and by depending on their personality, I guess, they don't want to, say, sneak up and hit you from behind and haha, I got you using this particular exploit. They want to demonstrate that they are legitimately the most skilled player. So you've got the honorable duelist type, you've got spawn campers, they're all lumped into there together. You'll also see them in other aspects of the game. Killers might like to be the guild leader, the person who runs the guild and bosses around the other members of said guild. They might be a killer type player. They don't necessarily need to be beating other players to demonstrate their superiority. They like leadership roles in games as well. They also like things like in-game economies, because that gives them another chance to be a dominant force. Like, you need to come to me if you want this item, because I've got it. I've got this and I've got all of these other ones. These are mine. You can have them, but you have to come to me. That sort of thing also appeals to them. So it is far more than just being the jerk who griefs everyone. So don't get that idea. You've got the honorable duelist as well as other player types. They are the ones who want to compete with other players. That is the basic summary of their type. And just because someone is of a different player type to you doesn't necessarily mean that there is no crossover for you to enjoy the same things. Let's take a look at an example of a community market. A killer has an obvious interaction here with market dominance and messing around with markets, like I just said in the explanation of what appeals to them. An achiever is also going to like, perhaps, community markets, for the reason that the community market allows them to gain equipment and gear, which allows them to take on higher levels of challenges so that they can earn the prestige of having beaten those challenges. They might also dislike a community market for the reason that it enables others who have not earned the gear that they might be trading for to get gear and therefore complete challenges. Again, it's that idea of them feeling that maybe that dilutes the prestige of their own accomplishments. So, two different types of challenges, different reasons why achievers might like or dislike something despite the fact that they have the same overall goals. Explorers, again, might like or dislike a trade system. For example, in Path of Exile, I don't like trading because it would totally deny me the discovery of finding the equipment on my own. I don't like to follow build guides because that would tell me what the interactions are for these various items and their synergies, and that's what I'm playing for. I want to find things, I want to discover, and therefore trading takes that away from me, so why would I want to do it? Other explorers, on the other hand, might be more interested in the theory crafting side of coming up with unique builds, and therefore, when they trade, they're trading to get those items so that they can try them out and see how different interactions can work together in order to get new and interesting results and builds and different interactions with mechanics, and so they really like that trading system. So it's player types. It informs you on why you like something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone within your group is going to like something. It is somewhat complicated. And of course there is the additional limitation on using a theory like this, where that is not the only reason why people play. But Bartle's taxonomy only covers people who are playing for their own enjoyment. You do have other reasons to play. Designers might play a game for the reason of looking at design decisions that a developer has made in order to figure out what's best for their next coming project. Journalists and reviewers play because it's their job, and you've got people like currency farmers who might be attempting to sell gold for WoW or something like that, and they've got an economic interest. Streamers as well have an economic interest in why they would stream a video. It's for a financial reward, and therefore they would play something that is popular and not necessarily appealing to them, but appealing to an audience because it's part of a job. That obviously is not covered by this sort of theory. That's just something to make clear. Again, I'm starting to ramble a little bit, so let's skip on to player interactions and why it's important to have a broader base of players rather than simply appealing only and focusing on that one part of the player base, because obviously it's good for the developers and their income to appeal to a wider audience. But for the player base itself, why should they have that appeal to multiple players? And this is going to be a basic explanation. It's not going to be crazy in depth if that's what you're expecting. This is something that you see a lot in online discussions on forums. It's the one that I've been seeing a lot lately is, why would you ever play a game that is not super hard and challenging? Overcoming those challenges is the point of the game. That is the sense of accomplishment, and that is the only reason that you would play. Anyone else who does not understand this is some sort of idiot or a filthy casual. I've played a lot of hard games, guys, and I don't really care for that sense of accomplishment that comes at the end, because again, I'm an explorer type. It's the journey more than the destination that matters to me. The sense of discovery will give me far more of a kick than beating a boss who happens to be really hard. Coming up with some interesting strategy or exploit to get through a situation rather than just beating that is far more exciting to me again as well. So yeah, it's not just you who should be appealed to either, because there are distinct interactions between the other players which improves the play experience for all involved by having a different mixture of them. So let's start off again with achievers. A lot of achievers love the competition that comes from having other achievers in the game. It gives them something to compete with, and again, they can demonstrate their prestige by being better. Other achievers will hate having other achievers in the game. because they want to be special. They want to be the best, and having that competition just means that their own sense of accomplishment is diluted by having other achievers also achieve their achievement. You can see that, like I mentioned before, with the extension of Legacy League in Path of Exile. You've seen a lot of achievers who are upset because it means that other people will be able to achieve those challenges given the extra time, and therefore they feel that their prestige is diluted by the fact that other people have similarly reached this level of skill. That's something that they really hate. What they do like are other players like socializers in the game, because socializers are willing to offer praise and adoration for their skill, and they're the ones that you're going to show your prestige off to by saying, hey dude, check out, I've got this sweet prestige hat that I've got. I won this hat by achieving all of these extra things, these challenges. You can't do them anymore. I've got the hat, nobody else can get this hat. Socializers are probably going to be the one who shows it off, and you do need non-achievers in there who will not have bothered to get those prestige rewards in order to have those prestige rewards mean anything. If everyone had it, it would not have any prestige attached to it, and so these guys do need someone in there to recognize their skill and, you know, do that sort of thing. Not necessarily every achiever is going to care for that. Some of them, the achievement is for their own sake rather than for the sake of others, but they do like to be recognized for their skill. So having other player types, the socializers in particular, is going to really give them a boost. Now, I mentioned that the socializers obviously like to interact with other players, and that should be obvious because socializers, they'd be fine with other socializers in the game, but they also like to have all the other player types in there as well. Explorers, for example, can benefit from socializers and the fact that they're someone who can benefit from the explorer's explorations. It's one thing to simply find something, it's another thing to tell someone else about it and be like, hey, check out this cool thing that I found. So socializers, again, they can boost that sort of thing. And then we've got killers. You would think that maybe killers would have less interaction with other players in a positive role, but again, this depends on what sort of killers you've got. Obviously, someone who is going to spawn campers in a game is awful, and people hate that. Killers obviously benefit from having other player types around. They like achievers generally because that's someone to challenge who is of high skill, but they've got other types who would prefer to interact with lower level players because it gives them that sense of dominance without necessarily needing to go out of their way to find a super high level player that they might not necessarily be able to deal with. And of course the killers also quite often like to be things like guild leaders, and so strong guild leaders to help you through competitive sections of the game and different PvP encounters between guilds and things like that. That benefits from the killer mentality, and having a strong leader is an example of something that a role that they can fill within the game. And then think about interactions like, for example, explorers and achievers. That's a solid interaction because, for example, a theory crafter who might be into the game to discover new and exciting builds, the achiever then benefits from that sort of knowledge because that helps them accomplish their ultimate tasks and gain that prestige that they're so interested in. So again, appealing to more explorer type players can introduce that sort of element to the game. And yeah, there's a lot more interactions obviously than just that, but those are just some basic examples. The point is that the interactions between the different player types can enrich the game and make it better for everyone involved, rather than simply designing it specifically for that one set of players. So that's one of the reasons why it is important to not only just notice the fact that these other player types exist, but to acknowledge and improve upon their particular tastes, because it introduces more players to the game, their interactions improve the game for the entire general player base. And of course also it's not quite as simple as simply lumping you into one of these groups, because there can be some crossover between the different groups. Explorers, for example, wanting to share their discoveries crosses over slightly into the socialization group. So, again, having this content there's going to be different levels of appeal with that content. You can be an achiever and still enjoy exploration. You just might want a reward, like an achievement, for doing said exploration, whereas a really exploration-focused player doesn't care to get a reward for exploration. They were always going to do that. The exploration in itself is the reward. The social aspects of the game might not be the main appeal, but you do enjoy them and would like to have them. That sort of thing. But yeah, that's pretty much all I really have to say about that. It took a long time to say it though, sort of off topic and rambling for a large portion of that, but I'm sure there are other videos out there that if you would like to explore this topic. I'll also link in the description to a test that you can take to see which of these you tend towards more, and hopefully it illustrates the point of why, there are other player types out there and there are other people who need to be appealed to, who play for other reasons than you do, and they enrich your game as well just by being there. So don't necessarily rule them out when you think that a game should only appeal to a certain demographic. And also remember that you can change your player type as well. It's not fixed. It can change or shift over time. So maybe your favorite game, you might come back to it and think, why did I like this so much? But if it had other reasons to appeal, you might discover an all-new reason to love it even more by going back to it. So, food for thought, people. Food for thought. Leave a comment. Tell me, did this interest you? What kind of gamer are you? I'd be interested in knowing, certainly. And hopefully, I've given you some food for thought. And you will pursue this topic to other, more capable sources who can explain it a lot better than me. Until next time.